Hey there, welcome. Hello, thank you so much for being with me today. We've got people joining us both on the webinar live and on Facebook and on Instagram. I want to encourage you to interact. If you have questions or comments about the things that we're discussing, the things that I'm sharing with you, please post the comment, post the question. If the question is something that it's appropriate for me to answer in this webinar, I will absolutely do my best to give you that information. My goal is to make this time well spent, right? I want you to benefit from being with me today. All right, so today we are talking about how do we do iridology in an appointment? How do we not bog our clients down with information that they don't need, but how do we get what we do need from the iris assessment? Now, if you've been hanging out with me for any length of time, you already know that I've got two missions in my business. The first one is to mentor practitioners who are struggling in their businesses because they spend their own time unpaid and after hours creating client programs. And the second is to teach the truth about iridology and its proper application in a wellness practice. So we need to, as we do this, we need to talk about what can we diagnose, what can we not diagnose, how do we do an iris assessment. We know that as iridologists, in most places in the world, this is an unregulated industry. It is regulated, that I know for sure, in Germany and Russia, but in the rest of the world, it is unregulated. That means we need to, that anyone can practice it, but we need to be very careful with how we practice it. We must never diagnose and we must never prescribe. So we're going to look at several cases today and show you how we do this. So for those of you who are on Instagram, I am moving my camera much closer so you can get a better view. And I apologize, it'll be a little wobbly because now I'm holding my camera by hand. So when we look at a set of irides, we never ever just look at the eyes and spew forth information, right? That's called fire hosing. I often will talk about it as vomiting all over your client. And that's really how it is. Instead, we always want context, because how I assess this set of eyes for this 10-year-old boy who's got a doctor's diagnosis of ADHD is going to be different from how I'm going to assess these eyes for someone who is maybe a 35-year-old female with reproductive problems, right? The information that is here can be applied in many different ways. So we have to understand what our client is looking for, what their health concerns are. So these are the eyes of a 10-year-old boy, as I mentioned, whose parents brought him to me. He was being evaluated for ADHD, which he eventually did get that diagnosis. And so as I'm looking at these eyes, it's not only what I see in the eyes, but I need to know also what is going on in his life. I need to understand his nutritional status. His eyes do not tell me what his nutritional status is. They tell me how his body wants to function. All right, so as we look at these eyes, we see that he's lymphatic, and your computer screen might show him as being biliary, but that's a computer tech issue. Either way, we're going to end up at the same place. And we know that he has anxiety tetanic. We've got all of these indicators of anxiety tetanic. We know that from his pigment color that he likely has a little bit of blood, he's at risk for, would be a better way to put this, a little bit of blood sugar tendencies and a little bit of liver tendency. So when we put all of that together, it tells us that he burns through his B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium, and magnesium very quickly. So I needed to ask his parents, what is his diet like? And the parents described a very typical North American diet. Breakfast was usually a cold cereal, sometimes some yogurt, sometimes they'd make white flour pancakes and have pancake syrup on it as opposed to maple syrup, usually some juice. He takes his lunch to school, and so it's usually like a ham and processed cheese on white bread, some kind of fruit roll up, maybe some cookies, and some kind of a drinking box, not necessarily juice, but you know, the colored water. Evenings are a little bit rushed. He's got a sibling and these two kids are pretty active. And so supper is often pasta because it's quick. And it's usually a white pasta. Well, it's always a white pasta. Some kind of a sauce, maybe a boiled or a steamed vegetable on the side, and maybe some protein, but that's about it. So as we are looking at his eyes, and I understand that that's what his diet is, I know that my first place that I need to start with him, and I'm not going to tell them everything that needs to be done in the first appointment, that would be fire hosing. Anybody would run screaming with the amount of homework that needs to be done if you give it all to them at once. So we started very simply. We started first with using some methylated liquid B vitamins with him. So they taste good, easy to get down him. He only needs, a milliliter or so a day and he's good to go. And we started working with his diet. So encourage the parents to take anything that was white flour and do it as a whole grain multigrain. That's an easy switch. They can still have pancakes. There's a company here where we live that makes a really lovely buckwheat pancake mix. And so suggested that they do the buckwheat pancakes instead, and that they substitute maple syrup for the pancake syrup. Suggested that protein at breakfast is a really good idea, and that doing some eggs with those pancakes would be really good. Doing an omelet for breakfast could be a really good idea as well. So taking what they're already doing and modifying it. Suggested that at lunchtime, could they start with using a multigrain bread? Could they give him a thermos of purified water instead of having him drinking artificially flavored, colored, sweetened garbage? Could they put real ham instead of processed ham? Could they use real cheese instead of processed cheese? So we just started migrating him over. That's all I needed to do with his eyes in the first appointment. And those are all the recommendations we made. That was it. The rest of the appointment was spent getting to know them, asking questions, finding out what they are capable of accomplishing, and finding out what kind of support system they have. It was really interesting because this little boy's mother and father came to every appointment with him. They came together, which just blew me away. That is so unusual. And they share cooking responsibilities. So they both understood what had to happen and what the transitions needed to be. We started to see some really lovely responses in this boy's attention abilities at school, just by increasing the amount of protein and getting rid of the refined carbs. Now, of course, we saw him several more times after that. And each time I would find out, how did these last changes go? Are there any struggles? Are there any challenges? All right, things are going great. Well, here's our next step. Let's modify this. Let's modify that. And we always talked about modifying, substituting, replacing, so that they never felt like we were just wiping everything off the table and they were having to start all over. Talking about modifications makes it an easier change in the mind, as opposed to completely changing things. Does that make sense? If that idea of talking about modifications makes sense, give me the word modification. Can you spell that? There's points for spelling today. Give me the word modification in the comments box so I know that that made sense to you. And did you see how easy that assessment was? We don't need to get bogged down in every single marking, in every radial furrow, in every contraction furrow, in every little thing. When we're doing constitutional iridology, we are looking first at the eye as a whole and applying that to the person as a whole. We don't get into dissecting things until we get much further in. And we've got people saying modification, brilliant, love it, love it. Here's our second one. This is a female who came to me in her mid-20s. She had been diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, and she had already had one ectopic pregnancy. And so she'd gained a lot of weight when she was engaged, and And we needed to get that weight off. We needed to get her balanced out because she and her husband really had their heart set on having a family. And so as we look at her eyes, and as we consider what her diet and her lifestyle was like, she's of German descent and has a very German diet: white flour, white sugar, lots of processed fats, lots of processed meats. Really not a very good diet, not very much by way of plant material in there, no vegetables, not much fruit, not much good quality protein. And so that was throwing her off. As we look at her eyes, we see she is lymphatic, she is polyglandular. Polyglandular increases the risk of adrenal and pancreas issues. PCOS is very tightly wound together with insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So that's exactly the pattern we saw with her. So we needed to do some revamping. Now, she was highly motivated. And being as she at the time was living alone, she was in an apartment on her own, she had complete control of her diet. And I felt confident that because she was motivated, she wasn't living alone, she was married and newlywed. She was newlywed, so she was just living with her husband. And her husband and she were totally on the same page. So we could do bigger changes here. We've got two people with the same goal. Husband was very lean, blood sugars fine, didn't need to lose weight. Wife needed to get her blood sugars in line so she could lose weight, so she could balance her hormones, her reproductive hormones. So we did very, very huge diet revamp with her. We took away all the refined carbs. We took away all the processed meats. I coached her on every aspect of diet. It was detailed. I was literally vomiting all over her with information, and she was writing down every word I said. That's one thing that I insist on. My clients take their own notes. I don't provide them with a written report. And I don't provide them with a written report because my way of describing things might not be their way of remembering things. So I have them write things down as we are working together so that they are writing it in a way that is meaningful to them. So as we did this, we knew we needed to really work on her blood sugar levels, and we knew we needed to work on her diet. We also needed to get her exercising. And so we recommended doing 30 minutes of walking, brisk walking every day. That's where we started, and we eventually got her into doing some resistance training. We got her getting rid of the carbs, replacing it with complex carbs. So she was getting rid of white flour, white sugar. If she needed a carbohydrate like a bread, it had to be a multigrain, right? We wanted it to be seedy and dense. We wanted her focusing more on her vegetables, on her low carb vegetables, and on her proteins. We got her taking a really high quality prenatal vitamin. We also got her doing some extra L5-MTHF. And we got her doing a few other supplements to help bring her hormones into balance. We did meet monthly for quite a while, about 6 or 8 months, and then she was able to conceive and carried that baby to term. Here we have a hematogenic iris. This again was another client, a female in her early 30s who wanted to get pregnant. She had been diagnosed by the doctors as having PCOS and insulin resistance. And so, and they actually said that she was full-blown type 2 diabetic. So not just insulin resistant, but full-blown type 2 diabetic. The doctors, of course, don't give any information on diet, and the dietitians are not overly helpful as well. And so they had simply given her metformin and Clomid. So I noticed a few things as I look at her eyes. Number one, she's got contraction furrows. So I know she burns through her B vitamins very quickly. She'd been using just an over-the-counter cheapo prenatal vitamin, which was not the best fit for her. When we look at her eyes, I'm going to try to get this focused really well for you. There is one little area right here that has a tiny, tiny brown pigment. And that's enough for me to suspect MTHFR. And so we put her on a prenatal vitamin that had the methylated Bs. and we added a little extra L5 MTHF to her. We ended up needing to do a few other things. We built her program over several months, but in that first appointment, we talked about the importance of protein, the importance of getting rid of the carbs. She's Asian. And what I found with many of my Asian clients is, she's first generation Asian, is they keep the white rice from Asia and they add all the garbage that North America has to offer, right? So her breakfast was a sweet roll with a glass of juice. And so we needed to really revamp her diet. The very first thing we did was get her to do protein at breakfast. And we got her to give up the white rice and to add more protein into her diet. That was our starting point. We added the prenatal vitamin, we added the L5, and I believe on that first appointment, we probably added some N-acetylcysteine to support the liver a little bit as well. We got her from having 90-day cycles down to 35-day cycles. A 90-day cycle is never fertile, ever. Even if she's ovulating, it's not fertile. We got her down to 35 days and we continued to work. Each month we would tweak her program a little. I had her tracking her basal temperature, her vaginal mucus, and monitoring other signs of fertility. It took us 18 months. She and her husband were really focused. Her husband actually came to every appointment with her too. It was quite remarkable. And so we got her at 18, 6 months in, her cycles were great, but it took her another 12 months to conceive. And then she was able to carry that baby to pregnancy. She had a 7-pound baby, boy, term delivery, 3-hour labor and delivery. Oh my goodness. So again, we didn't have to look at every single marking. This is her left eye, left or right, her pupil's quite centered. This is her, this is her right iris. She does have a marking in the ovary, which adds weight to the PCOS, but I didn't go into every single marking. Really, we need to focus on what are the markings in the eyes that are relevant to the situation, and not every marking will be. That's how we assess an eye based on the particular needs of the moment. Is this making sense? That we don't need to do a detailed iris report. We only need to focus on the markings that give us relevant information. If that makes sense, give me a makes sense in the comments. All right, so now that you've seen how quick and easy this is, let me just take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Judith Cobb. I am a level 3 IPA certified iridologist. Level 3 is the highest level that IPA offers at this point in time. And I'm also a level 3 instructor. There are only 5 of us in the world to date. I have been in the holistic healing industry for over 4 decades. I've written several books that I self-distributed, self-published, self-distributed, and I've done a lot of created a lot of different courses. I am also a master herbalist and a nutrition professional with affiliations with the Canadian Association of Holistic Nutrition Professionals and the Canadian Association of Natural Nutritional Practitioners. The beauty of having these 2 nutrition affiliations is that if my clients have extended benefits, which is something that's probably peculiar to Canada, where their individual employers may have insurance packages that offer specific coverage. If they've got coverage in their package for nutrition or for holistic nutrition, I can issue an insurance receipt to cover their, for them to get reimbursed for their appointment fees, which is really great. All right, let's look at another eye. All right, so it's making sense here. This is so good. I appreciate the feedback. And those of you with me on the webinar live, I'd love to hear from you as well. I believe I've got the messaging set up that you can actually can send me messages there. So that would be great. And those of you on Instagram, please feel free to drop comments as well. This is the eye of a 20-year-old student, university student. And what she came in to see me about, she came in on her Christmas break. She was attending university 1,000 miles away. and she was home for Christmas, and she was concerned that she was gaining weight. She had been to the doctor. The doctor didn't give her any useful information. And so she's gaining weight. I look at her eyes and I see this little thing right here, which when we blow it up, you can see what it is it's the collarette raised right off the surface of the iris. Okay. Now, actually, between both of her eyes, she has 3 of these, which is highly irregular. And so what this means is that she has an increased genetic risk of blood sugar imbalances. So I asked her about family history. There wasn't any to do with blood sugar. I asked her then, because she's gaining weight, and this says she's likely prone to blood sugars. I asked her about her menstrual cycles. I asked her, are they regular? And she said, yes. And I said, are they every 4 weeks? And she said, no, they're 4 weeks late. So I said, does that mean they're happening every 8 weeks? And she said, yes. Cycles that are typically 6 weeks or further apart, that's a hallmark indicator of polycystic ovarian syndrome. Again, PCOS is closely intertwined with type 2 diabetes. So we talked about her diet. Because she was going to university away from home, she was eating in the cafeteria. She was on the campus meal plan, which of course is usually not great, right? And so we talked about where she lived. She didn't have a car. Was there a grocery store that she could walk to? Yes. Did she have a kitchen? Yes. Did she have kitchen utensils? Yes. Would she be willing to prepare some of her own food? Yes. Brilliant. Let's start talking. So she really wanted to lose weight, but I know her family, and I know that one of her goals is to get married and to have a family of her own. And so I underscored for her the importance of dealing with this now, learning what she needs to know now, implementing it now, so that when she does get married, her reproductive health will be good. Right? We're laying the foundation for a few years down the road. So as we talked to her, again, her diet was high carb because that's campus meal plan. She had very little physical activity. She was living on campus, so she would walk to her classes and then walk back to her apartment. And that was all, nothing else. So again, very similar to what we mentioned earlier, we really stress the importance of protein and of vegetables, of leafy vegetables, of low carb vegetables. And we stress the importance of exercise. For her, again, walking would be sufficient. And so we outlined a program of what she could do, gave her some menuing ideas for breakfast, lunch, and her evening meal and snacks, and got her to start walking for at least a half an hour per day as a dedicated walk, not including what she was doing to get to school, right, to get to her classes. Well, she left for university to go back for her second semester, and I got an email from her a month or so later, and she said, whoopee, I'm losing weight, things are starting to happen, this is all good. And so we were able to get her cycles down from 8 weeks to 4 weeks. We were able to get the weight coming off. And again, it was a very simple analysis. It wasn't looking for every single marking and how does every marking impact anything. It was looking for an understanding of, why is she gaining weight? What in her constitution could lean her towards gaining weight easily? What in her diet and lifestyle is pushing her that direction as well? Connecting those dots and creating a program that she could work with. So Kelly's asking, in the US, is that similar to a health savings account or a health spending account? It could be. Here in Canada, our health spending accounts are regulated as to what they can be spent on. And so, and that is a part of what some of my clients have, is a health spending account. As for some of them, it's actually designated that they can spend $500 on nutrition coaching specifically. So yeah, very, very similar. Does that help, Kelly? All right, so here's another client. Now, a lot of my work is with fertility, and so we see a lot of cases in our case studies that we do here to do with fertility. So this is another client who was struggling with fertility. She was in her early 30s, and she had been trying for a while to get pregnant with no luck. Now, as we look at her eyes, we see that she is also polyglandular. That instantly suggests adrenal, pancreas, and can include reproductive imbalances. We also see that she has a teensy splotch of darker pigment right in here around this little lacuna, right? And the darker pigment tipped me off that she was probably MTHF or MTHFR. Now, her diet was really good, as was her general health practice. Probably the weakest link for her was not enough protein. Most of her diet's organic. She does a lot of vegetables. If she's doing grains, they're whole grain, multi-grain. She really is very health conscious. She's physically active. She's high stress and she knows it. So she and her husband try to get away to the mountains every weekend to get away from the stress levels that she has at work. So as she was working again, we really focused on diet. We focused on building her proteins. That was the very first thing we did. And we got her some healthy fats. She was a little shy on her good fats. So we started building that, started with foods, and over the process of working together, added supplements. But our focus was always, how is this affecting her fertility? Again, I had her tracking her basal metabolic temperature. I had her tracking her vaginal mucus and any other fertility symptoms that she had. Now, we can't tell by looking at the eyes that she has PCOS, but again, her cycles were far apart. Her menstrual flow was very, very light. In fact, she described her menstrual flow as being a smear on the toilet paper. She never even would use a panty liner. That suggests that there's a hormone imbalance, and her doctors had never flagged that. So because of her symptoms and because of being polyglandular, looking at her diet, which was generally pretty good, we could see where the weak links were. And we started building her nutrition profile. Of course, we put her on the high quality prenatal vitamin that had methylated Bs in it because I suspected she was MTHFR, and added some liver support because that's usually indicated with MTHFR as well. Over time, again, we added the L5 to her, and we added other supplements as they were necessary and other herbs. Interesting that halfway through she did get pregnant, by the way, and nervous Nelly through the whole pregnancy. Like every other week, there was an absolutely vibrational email, that she was panicking over something, and I'd have to talk her back down and let her know that we'd already dealt with that. I've had that base covered since the get-go. And she would take that deep sigh of relief, and we'd be good for another week or two. Well, halfway through her pregnancy, she decided to do 23andMe. And then she sent me an email that literally almost made my computer explode. It had so much tension in it because she came back as having one anomaly for the MTHFR defect. And again, I was able to say, hey, don't worry about it. You're okay. I suspected this from the get-go. That's exactly why we're doing these particular vitamins. So just it's okay. I've got you here. I've had you all along. And again, she did that deep breath. Oh, thank goodness I've got you in my corner, because the doctors, of course, don't do anything. They don't test for MTHFR. They don't address it at all. They don't understand how MTHFR can affect fertility, how it can affect PCOS. And so we were able to really get her settled. She went on to have a beautiful baby boy. She ended up with a C-section because she failed to progress. And instead of phoning me while she was in labor to find out what other things she could do, they went for a C-section, which was disappointing to her, but she's got her healthy baby boy. And that was what she wanted out of the deal. So we can heal up after cesarean section, right? We can heal up after surgery. It would just have been nice to have found ways to help her mitigate that and avoid it. All right, again, we can't tell from looking at the eyes who has any kind of a problem, but we can see the inherent predispositions. When we see those inherent predispositions, we can couple that with their questions, what their health concerns are, with their diet, with their lifestyle, with their family history, and it will give us that deeper understanding to know how to work with them, right? We don't diagnose, we don't prescribe. We assess and we recommend. That makes sense? If that makes sense, give me an oh yeah in the comments box. Let me know that it makes sense for you. For those of you who are with me on the webinar, I just realized that I still didn't have it set up properly for messaging. So you should be able to send me messages now through the chat box. My apologies for that. All right, so one more client. Here's your detailed microanatomy lesson for today. We have a liver that connects through bile ducts to the gallbladder, and that all connects via the common bile duct to the small intestine. Common bile duct also connects to the pancreas. When the liver produces bile, it is sent into the bile ducts, and if the bile is not needed right now in the intestinal tract, that bile is sent into the gallbladder to be concentrated. That way, when you eat something fatty, that bile is then squirted out through the common bile duct into the small intestine. Right down here, where the bile duct connects to the small intestine, there's a sphincter called the sphincter of Oddi. A very common problem that people have when they have their gallbladder removed is that this sphincter of Oddi can become constricted. We don't understand why, and we don't understand if it is closing with scar tissue somehow, or if it's just starting to spasm shut, but it can create all kinds of problems. If our client thought having gallstones was bad, they haven't seen anything yet, because sphincter of Oddi is even worse. This will then block the flow of fluid from the liver. It'll block the flow of bile from the liver and of the pancreatic juices from the pancreas. And that can lead to serious complications for both the liver and the pancreas. Okay, so this is the eye of a very sweet client, a man in his mid-50s, late 50s actually. He is probably one of the kindest, most thoughtful people I have ever met. He's tall, he's strong, he works in the building industry as a health and safety inspector. He, by his own admission, has to work with a lot of businesses doing inspections. They're government required inspections. And a lot of the people that he has to interact with are not nice. He has to report to the government what he finds, right? He has to write up these reports. They get filed with the health and safety, with the government's health and safety department. And if there are infractions, the company has to straighten them out. And they don't like it, because if the infractions persist, there are fines. If they persist, the company gets shut down, right? And so they don't like what this guy has to do. But this guy does his job really well, and he does it without attitude. He's not arrogant, he's not snotty, he's not abusive. He just goes in and does his job, and he'll say, hey, you know, I found these things that need to be fixed, and you understand why. And so here's the report that I have to file. So I'll be back next week to see how you've done with getting things reorganized. Now, he gets a lot of vitriol. He gets a lot of garbage thrown at him with that. And he never gives it back, right? He never loses his cool. Instead, he takes it and he stuffs it. And he stuffs that anger down deep. Now, you know that gallbladder is where we store anger, bitterness, and resentment. And you know that gallstones are the result of unresolved anger. So when he came to me, he'd been a client of mine for many years. Then, of course, he faded off for a bit. Then he came to me having had his gallbladder removed and was now having problems with his sphincter of Oddi. And we talked about the anger. And I said, this fellow's name is Kevin. I said, Kevin, I have always known you to be one of the kindest, most thoughtful people I've ever met. You know, if there's I mean, he's a hunter. He would bring me wild game. I love wild game. He would bring me a elk roast or a moose steak or whatever. Just really, really thoughtful, right? And I said, so I know from what you've said about your job that there's a lot of garbage and you deal with a lot of angry people. He said, yeah, I do. And I said, and so how do you deal with that anger? He said, I just keep being nice. And I said, well, you've got to let it out. The not letting it out is what went to your gallbladder. That's why you had gallstones, the not having a way to resolve it. So I said, I don't know what that's going to look like for you, whether you want counseling or whether you want to start journaling or whether you want to set up a punching bag in the basement, whether you want to, we live fairly close to a very large wildlife area, and whether you want to go down there and get deep in the woods and scream at the top of your lungs, that you need to let it out because holding it in is not going to do you any good at all. So as we look at this fellow's eye, at about 8 o'clock, is where we would expect to see gallbladder, which is right here. There's nothing there. Genetically, there should never have been a problem with his gallbladder. Genetically, there is not a gallbladder weakness here. Okay, so his gallbladder problem was triggered by emotion. These other pigments suggest that there might be a tendency towards some gallbladder imbalance, but nothing that I would consider to be so structural that it would lead to gallstones. This does suggest more on that emotional level, in my opinion, that he is prone to anger issues. And I don't mean getting violent and abusive and out there, but he has problems dealing with anger, and that's why he stuffs it down. I suspect when I see people who are this nice, I suspect that they've been taught throughout their life that anger is bad, that you never show anger, that you're not allowed to express it. You just have to pretend it doesn't exist. And so we had that discussion that anger is not bad. It's how you resolve it that can be damaging to other people. So you need to find ways to resolve it, because if you don't, it's damaging to you. Does that make sense? So we were able to see that there's a bit of a gallbladder tendency, but not necessarily with the structure of his gallbladder. So that suggests it's more of an anger type of thing. All right, so where does this leave us? It means that when we do an iris assessment properly, then we've got a couple of things that are working for us. Number one, we can do an assessment quickly and easily without getting bogged down in details and without bogging our client down in details. That means that we can create our programs in our client session. And if we get it done in our client session, it means that we are not giving them too much information. Usually, some of us talk really fast. And so we need to be aware that if we have to take extra time to create a program, we're probably giving too much detail, too much information. Get it done in your client session. Okay, so that is so important that we focus on what our client is asking for help with, and we stay on task, and we give them, think of where we were many years ago when we started out on our journey to become wellness practitioners. That's probably where they are. So giving them everything we know right now is the wrong answer. They don't want all of our years of information. They want the wisdom we've gained. And that means we can distill down the information that we need to give them to what they need to know right now, right? Simplify, simplify, simplify. So in order to do that, we need to remember that iridology is an assessment tool. It's not a diagnostic tool. It points the way to the questions we should ask. It guides our questions, it guides our discussion, and it helps us to focus in, to laser in on what's essential for that client in this moment. So iridology, when we talk, oh, what happened there? Just a moment. The Dynamic Iridology Assessment System course that I teach is designed for you if you already have anatomy and physiology under your belt. You've taken a separate course in anatomy and physiology. If you want to learn how the markers play off each other, so you're not just saying one marker means one thing. If you want to learn what questions the eyes want you to ask in correlation with your client's symptoms. If you want to learn how to create programs that your client can be more successful in implementing. So the programs are more focused, they're simpler, they're specific as opposed to being general. And if you want to be mentored for the long term, and I want you to think of that as years, not just when you're enrolled in the program, then let's talk. Let's talk, because the next course, the next go round of Dynamic Iridology is starting on October 12th. The class time is 12 o'clock to 2:15 Mountain Time. So we meet once a week on Wednesdays at this time for 20 classes. Registration is open, but I shouldn't say but. Registration is open, and I like to get to know my prospective students before they enroll in the class. So I like to have a Zoom video call with them. And that's what the Dynamic Iridology Insight Call is all about. It's to give you more details about the course. It's for us to make sure this is a good fit for you so that, that you're in the right place, right? I don't want students in the course that are not ready to be there, because then they're going to drop out and they're not going to get their value. One of my students, who's actually a student right now, she said this, she wasn't even, she's not even finished the course. This is after her second lesson. I just wanted to say, as a new student who has worked in iridology before this, and as a certified iridologist through another teacher, I have learned more in the first 2 lessons of your Dynamic Iridology course than in all my previous iridology training. I am so glad I decided to sign up. I know that after taking this course, I will be, oops, there should be an able in there, will be able to offer my clients the best and most up-to-date knowledge. Thank you, Judith. Yours truly, Tricia Culstow. Love that. Stephanie Morgan, who has a master's degree in education, said this. I asked her what she, after she'd finished, what she thought of the course, why she took the course. She said, if you're thinking about this, don't put it off. I regret not signing up as soon as I learned about Judith. I was waiting for life to settle down. Hint, there is never a better time. Life is going to happen whether you're in class or not. Then she said, I'm so thankful for Judith's approach. Every week I see clients leave the holistic office where I work in a dazed, overwhelmed stupor. Far too many of them do not return. I just have to praise my teacher for a minute. Those of you who know Judith from videos already recognize she's an amazing instructor. What you may not realize is that students and graduates have access to Judith and training videos and alumni even after the class is finished. She is a rare find in the under-promise and over-deliver. I am so thankful I was led to her website. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Exactly what I'm aiming for. Dynamic Iridology Assessment System is 20 classes, 2¼ hours of live webinar, interactive, recorded for playback on demand. I limit my students to no more than 10 students per class. We also have a live group mentoring session twice a month, where students can bring other questions, they can bring cases they're working on, we can talk about business development, we can talk about marketing in these group mentoring sessions, which are scheduled. They're held at set times, so if you need extra support in any way, they're there for you when you're my student. We have the student and alumni, actually it's a MeWe group now. We moved our social media group off of Facebook because Facebook likes to censor things. MeWe does not. You receive a 225-page digital textbook, so it's downloadable. So you don't have to purchase a textbook, it's included. 45 pages of digital study notes, AKA cheat sheets. You might think of these as Cole's notes or Cliff's notes. The course includes, for students who want it, the IPA certification mentoring one-on-one. IPA has a protocol that is laid out for how you need to be mentored to prepare for certification. That is included for you. And I include the case studies for the certification prep. The Dynamic Iridology Assessment System is the only live, online, fully mentored course for herbalists, naturopaths, and other practitioners, holistic health practitioners who want to streamline their clinical work. This is to help you get your programs created in your client sessions. It's to help you achieve greater success in baby steps with your clients. You do it in baby steps, they keep coming back. They do your word of mouth advertising. The more success they have, the more they advertise. If you vomit all over your clients, and I know that just sounds really crude, but if you do that and you overwhelm them, they don't get results, they don't come back, they don't advertise for you. It's not great for business, just saying. The goal is to teach you constitutional iridology and how to use it confidently so that you can easily integrate what you already know about nutrition or herbology or aromatherapy or naturopathy or homeopathy to confidently create doable client programs in your paid client sessions. So once again, if you're interested in more details about the course, I would like to meet you in a Zoom video call. Just use the link you see on the screen. And for those of you in the Facebook that are with me live, I'm sorry I didn't put that where I can paste it for you. tinyurl.com/dynamic-iridology-insight. Let's have a chat. Let's see where you're at. Let's make sure this is a good fit for you. Let me give you the details about tuition and other support and everything you need so that you can decide to join us for the course. Now I'm seeing comments. Kelly was talking about the fellow with the sphincter of Oddi issue. He says, I've experienced a story very similar to this. I'm so grateful you were there for him. Can you add the link to the chat? Jay, if I put it somewhere where I could, and I forgot to put it in my teaching notes, I absolutely would put it there. Let me just hang on a sec. Let me just actually type it into comments here for you. Okay, so there it is for Facebook in the comment thread. For those of you who are in the webinar with me, com/dynamic-iridology-insight. Make sure, oops, it doesn't work if you give it, if you have a typo in there, does it? tinyurl.com. There we go. Okay, there we go. So that should hopefully be in the chat there for those on the webinar. All righty, amazing. Any other questions? Give it just a second for a few questions to come in, and then I'll be hopping off to go and teach my Thursday class. I hope this has given you some clarity that when you see these iridology assessments that are done for free on social media, and it lists out the whole big long list of every marking that the iridologist sees and everything the client needs to do, that is not helpful. It is not instructive. It really overloads the client, and it means they're likely going to pick and choose the thing they want to do or the thing that resonates with them. And you and I, as holistic practitioners, already know that it's not a pick and choose situation. Iridology, when you practice it well, will help you to prioritize the order in which the homework needs to be done. And when you give that homework step by step, one piece or two pieces at a time, your client will be much more successful. They will get better results. They will be thrilled with the results they get from you, and they will absolutely want to keep working with you. Right? And so important that we avoid the temptation to show off what we know and instead focus on what the client's needs really are. And that's my soapbox, and I'm not getting off it. I'm standing on that firmly. And with that, my friends, I'm not seeing any other questions come through. So thank you for being with me today. I look forward to hopefully having a call with you very soon and to helping you get enrolled in the course. Have a fabulous day. We'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.